We can begin. All right. Can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me? All right, my name is Andrew Kim. Over here in the front seat is Trudy Vaughn, and we're part of the Search and Data Tools team. We're here to talk to you about Backbone, give you an introduction, tell you about what we've learned, go through a bit of the features and such. So, what is Backbone? Backbone.js is a JavaScript framework created by Jeremy Ashkenaz. He's the author of CoffeeScript. I don't know if you guys have heard it. It's big buzz these days, integrated into Rails 3.1. Makes JavaScript pretty and actually usable.
Makes it Ruby.
Yes, makes it Ruby. Backbone is based off of MVC architecture, model, view controller. If you're familiar with Rails, I'm sure you're familiar with those terms. That's exactly how Rails is built, models, views, and controllers. In Backbone, it's actually not a controller, it's called a router, but we'll get more into that later. It's great for building rich internet applications. So as you can tell, a lot of websites are getting a lot more complicated, and a lot more interactions. They're much more complex as far as what they're able to do on the client side. So Backbone really helps you organize that, maintain that, and also give you that full feature set available to you. And then for some examples, LinkedIn, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with. It uses Backbone Basecamp, which is kind of a project management tool built by 37 Signals. And Pandora, where you can stream your music. These are all kind of some of the bigger names that use Backbone. And also Buzz. Buzz is the up-and-coming big name that's being used Backbone. So here's an example of what probably a lot of our JavaScript looks like. You got your jQuery. You bind elements to click events or change events. And when this can get really ugly and confusing and complicated really quick, especially you have all these anonymous function callbacks that call other functions that respond to other events, and we kind of call this like a callback soup and salad, except not so tasty. And you can just get hairy, and it's just as you can all tell, a lot of people when they're like, oh, you got a JavaScript bug, it's like crap. I don't want to deal with it. But so some of the problems that you get with this kind of code is your logic is very tightly coupled and packed, meaning your code is very rigid, and a small change in one little spot in your logic will affect tons of things all over the place. It's not a very good, flexible way to build your user interface in your web page. And then also, going on to the next slide, there's no distinction between your data and your presentation. So a lot of times your data is tied to your DOM. You'll find out that, and sometimes even data is stored in your DOM, and that's not very smart, I guess. That's not very desirable. And also sometimes I find myself, I'm storing DOM information in my data, just because I have no other way of getting at it. So, there's a lot of bad habits, a lot of things you don't want happening in your maintainable code. You definitely want to decouple these, because your data should be your data and your presentation should be your presentation. That way both can change without really, having to interact with each other too much as far as code goes. And this is the reason why, because you can't reuse code components. If they're so tightly coupled together, that means it fits a very certain specific situation. And you can't take certain data and just move it over and apply it to a different view. Or you can't take a view and say, hey, this view is very similar, it just uses kind of a little bit of a different data model, and you can't reuse it. So that's hard for maintenance, that's hard for fixing bugs. It's just, we learn in programming, be dry. You want to be able to reuse your code. So then, what happens, right? Your code sucks, right? Your user interface sucks. You don't want to fix it. You don't want to add anything to it. You don't want to do anything to it. So, we're of kind of this opinion with Steve. Oops. So before we get into Backbone, which will make hopefully things a lot easier, there's one dependency for Backbone.js, and that is _JS, written by the same author. It's in this, here's the GitHub repo for it, documentcloud.github.com/_. It's a very small library. It's under 4 KB for those of you who care about how much bandwidth you're adding onto your web pages. But you get a lot for that little bit of data that you're getting there. You get all these functions and utilities. This is just a sample of them. This isn't everything. But on your arrays, you get lots of utility functions on your collections. I'm sure you're used to seeing these on Ruby's enumerable, where we're all very happy that they're there. They make life a lot easier. The big ones are probably like .each, and on objects, one thing that Backbone really heavily relies on is extend, where you can extend objects with actually like cloning them and stuff. So those are the ones that are really useful that Backbone heavily relies on. Okay. So what does Backbone give you? Okay. And it gives you more objects. Okay. So in JavaScript, everything's an object. So what you get are just more happy objects. These are really useful. Okay. Some of them are functions, but functions are objects too in JavaScript. So it's kind of confusing, but I don't really get it either. But if you look, this is what you get. You get a global variable called Backbone, which is an object. And then inside Backbone, you get all these things. You'll get events, you'll get models, you get views, you get a router, you even get like a cool sync object that I won't be talking about. But you get lots of things. And events is actually really key. Events is tied into all the other objects. So all the other like model views and routers and collections, they all get events built in with them. So events is kind of like the starting point in Backbone. And what's cool is with events, you can even add Backbone events to any of your own custom objects. So even if you had like a random hash somewhere and you wanted to tie events to it, you can even just extend that hash with Backbone events, and you'll get really nice events that are very descriptive and pass along the context and stuff. So Backbone definitely provides a lot of that framework for you, so you don't have to deal with all that chaos of JavaScript events that we're all so loving to deal with, I'm sure. Okay, so moving on. Like I said, there's some things that we haven't tried in Backbone, so we don't find them very useful. One of them is this router, also the C and MVC. Yes, it's used for single-page apps where you can add cool little URLs past the hashtag, and where you don't have to like actually refresh the page. We haven't had much of a need for it inside tools because that's not too big of an issue. Tree will give his opinion on that as well, but I mean they're there if you want them and need them. You want to be on the cutting edge, but we haven't really seen too much of a necessity for them, so we'd rather not deal with that kind of complexity in our JavaScript. And the cool thing is, Backbone works great. You don't have to use every piece of Backbone. It is very modular in that sense. So onto the model. Here we go. Here's 2 versions of a model. This is not what we're dealing with. So a model, as you would expect, is a representation of data. Okay, and it's a nice little wrapper around your actual data. You get cool actions such as saving, retrieving, conversions. Like you can get an automatic like to.json function. You can even add validation into your models, which we're all used to doing in Rails. And then you get events. So whenever anything happens to your model, you can trigger it. Automatically triggers events like on save or on update or on delete, things like that. And so other things can listen to what's happening in your models. All right, so here's an example of a person. This is typical, just raw JavaScript. You have a little hash, var person equals, first name Andrew, last name Kim, and period code blue. Okay. So how do you build your model? So once again, in JavaScript, everything's an object, so you don't actually have real classes. So all you're doing is extending objects. So model in Backbone gives you a base point to start, and then your custom model extends that functionality or overwrites if you need to. So what you do is in your JavaScript, you create a person class, so put it in quotes because it's not actually a class, and then you can start defining stuff in your class, like there's a save function, or If you need validation, saying, hey, and then I wrote like a small little getter function where it concatenates the first name and the last name and returns the full name, right? If you notice in that helper in that helper function, I use this. And what's cool is anytime you're in a model or any other kind of Backbone object, this refers to that instance. It's almost like self in any Ruby class. So a lot of times when you have events or you're doing something in JavaScript, you're always wondering about what context, what scope you're in. Am I in the global scope? Like, what does this actually mean? And one thing that's really, really helpful in Backbone is that you always know what your this is when you're inside a Backbone object, because this always refers to the instance. So that's actually very helpful, very useful. I don't know how many times that has caught me and caused a lot of frustration in debugging. So I'm glad Backbone helps me out there. So to actually instantiate an instance of this person, you say var_ak equals new person, pass it the data, okay? And then it'll actually take that hash of data, the first name, last name, and it'll store it in something called attributes. So if you do ak.attributes, it'll just spit it right back out. I can call my helper method, actually in the previous slide it was .name, but it's .fullname. And then you have, like I said, other neat little methods like .fetch, where if you provided a REST API URL, it'll automatically use RESTful standards to go get the data, provided you have an ID. If you've changed, let's say I changed my favorite color to green, and then I called .save, it would automatically put the data to the REST API. And all these things can be overwritten, but Backbone comes with a lot of this built in. And if you're building a lot of RESTful APIs in your Rails end of the app, Backbone ties in very well, very neatly with that. So you can almost do like a one-to-one relationship between your Rails model and your Backbone model if you would really want to. So it's pretty cool. Like, you don't have to do a lot of the, on this click, go gather the data and then go send it. And I'm sure we've written all that kind of jQuery code that's really awful and hideous. And I'm glad those days are over. So that's the model. And then what you also get is a collection. A lot of times you're not just dealing with one piece of data, but we're dealing with a lot of it. So, a collection is an ordered set of models. Basically, you get all the functionality in a model, but now you get it on the entire array. And so, like here I have a bunch of celebrities. Actually, is Arnold no longer, he doesn't have any? I thought he's back into acting.
So at the time of this writing, I was not sure what he is or where he is. So that's why it's an NA right there.
Okay. So you can see, just like I had a person in the previous example, here we have a bunch of people, and we're going to go put them in a collection. So, this is a really bare bone collection. You just provided what model it comes with, and I called it people, and then I just created an instance called the group by passing it those celebrities. And then you get cool things like, what's the celebrity at, index 2, and you get David Beckham, and you get the model. So you don't just get the data, you actually get the model, and then the model has all of its features that come available with it. And you can get the length, you can even remove people from it, and all these things, remove would trigger, a change event on your collection. And so if you have things that are tied to your collection, then adding and removing would then trigger all these events. And later when we talk about views, your interface can then respond. Instead of you having to keep track of what's in there and how many people you have in your list, what size is it, sorting it or whatever, Backbone helps you handle those with a lot of built-in events. We have a question in the back. Yes?
That's right. So that celebrities object right there, was that just the anonymous objects from the previous slide, or were those wrapped in Backbone model objects?
No, so you can pass it just this, right? You can just pass it this straight up array of anonymous objects, right? And it'll know that it's supposed to be a person model.
Oh, so it marshals them.
Yeah, so it'll marshal them in for you and stuff. So that's what it would do.
I have a question. Can you have different models in the same collection?
I'm not sure, but I'm thinking no. Actually,
There's the initialize method, which you can do whatever you want with the data.
Yeah. Oh yeah, so any of the initialize stuff you could overwrite like Krishna mentioned. So yeah, you could detect the type of, I guess, or whatever, and then do what you want with each different type of model.
Okay.
Yeah.
But for the sake of consistency, that is not advised.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the programmer coming in after you probably would curse at you if you so different.
Just leave your home address.
Yeah.
When you do that group.remove, is that going to actually hit the back end if you set it up to do that?
If you do, yeah, so you could probably, if you do a dot remove, and then I think you might have to bind it to a change event, but I do believe that wouldn't actually remove it from the backend until you did a dot save. So there are certain calls that specifically go to the backend, like they're called like fetch and save and destroy. Like those kind of things are actually like reaching, but I don't think remove would. Okay. So now onto the view. Who knows this movie?
You do account.
Sweet. That's right. And Roger Moore, James Bond. Tree's a big fan. So it's a view in a traditional sense as your presentation logic or your presenter. Basically, it encapsulates everything that the person is looking at, right? And what's cool is in JavaScript that includes the interactions. Okay. Most of the times it's just very stateful when we're talking about like templates or something like that. But then now we have a very dynamic view that can handle many, many things. So similar to model, all you do is do Backbone.js to create a person view. I found that you use the initialize function a lot in views more because there is a bit more setup in views. Mostly, this is very typical in Backbone where you would bind it to the model that your view is associated with. And then you would say, hey, listen to anything that happens in the model and re-render. So to do that, you go this.model.bind to the change event and then this.render. So that's usually very typical. Oh, and you initialize in template. That's supposed to be template. That's a typo. You usually initialize a template inside the initialize function as well. And what's cool is inside views, you get this attribute called events, where you can define in a very human readable way, like, hey, if this is clicked, call this function. There's things like change or, any basically jQuery event, you can put it in here, and then you can do like dot this to say the element with the class dot this. When that event happens on that element, then call this function. And you can pass in any sort of jQuery type of DOM searching, I guess, on that as well. And then one thing that does come with a view, your view will do nothing unless you define its render function. So usually you would call, and one thing that's cool about Backbone is you can use like third-party libraries as well. So right now here I have a jQuery this.l. L refers to the element this view is tied to, specifically in the DOM, and then I say replace the HTML with what the template renders when I pass it the model that I have. So that's kind of like a cool way, newer way to render HTML without doing string concatenation by using templates. And then once again, you can add any sort of helper methods that you want to your view. And this is usually where you do most, actually you should do all your kind of presentation, anything to do with user interaction should go here. You should not, a lot of times we get tempted to put that in the model, but you should really try to keep that here in the view when it has to do with your user interface. So, to initialize a view, you can just say, var aka view, and then like I said, you have to pass it its two dependencies. You pass it the DOM element that it's associated with, and then the model that's associated with. And then when this happens, it'll call the initialize function. And then usually at the end of your initialize function, you would call render. Like you would actually call this.render. And that would render the view once it's initialized. So to give you an example, a little demo, I have two views in this little demo here. There's an input view that's listening to an on change on the input I have here. And there's a little text view where it displays your name and my color. And that listens to the person model that we created in the examples and for any changes. So what I do here is if I type the word like yellow, it'll listen to what's, anytime it changes, it's updating and re-rendering the little div underneath. So what was it, like pound FF6600? It'll change the color. So basically this is just updating the CSS associated with that view. So this is a very basic, very primitive, I think this took like maybe 10, 15 lines of code to see what Backbone can do to you, and it's very organized. I have two views, I have one model, and I'm just listening to on-change events. And tree will now come up and talk to you about why Backbone is so awesome now that we've given you just an introduction to it. So, what we've learned from tree.
Excuse me, quick question.
Oh.
Those were two views and one model, right?
Yes.
Can you show us the source code?
Actually, can we do it?
Or if you do it later?
Because we intend to show you a lot of source code.
So actually, yes.
But still.
I don't know if you guys can read that, but that's the entire source code for those two views. There's a person view, an input view, and then here's your model right here. And then I instantiate each of those right here. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And yes, like Tree said, there is a much more extensive demo at the end where we actually see fully featured Backbone.
All right. Hi, everyone. So Andrew's given you a tour over the basic components of Backbone.js. And now I'm going to go over more details and give you lots of examples and codes that fill in lots of the ... or blanks in the sample codes that you saw on the screen. So what have we learned over the past couple months working with Backbone.js? So one of the first things that we learned is that it gives you a way to structure your code into an organized fashion because of the whole philosophy around the framework. Now your logic is no longer coupled together. You can distinguish between them and put them into modules or structures like this. So now if you want to look for something, you know what to find. So that's one advantage. The next advantage I'm talking about is reusability. In one of the applications that we're working with, the manual overrides framework, we're working a lot with category, and the client is asking for a category autocomplete view. What it does is that when you type in a category, it gives you a list of categories. And we use that a lot. We use that in the category keyword tool. We use it in the exclusion tool. We use it in query rewrite. And in the future, maybe result override as well. So how do we reuse it? How do we make a component that can be reused for each of the tools? So this is how we did it. We create a definition of an category autocomplete view, and then we reuse it once in the category keyword tool, twice in the exclusion tool, the third time also in the exclusion tool, and in the query rewrite tool. I'm going to go into more code near the end. But this basically gives you an idea about how the framework helps you to make reusable components for the sake of maintainability and reusability. The next advantage is that because of the declarative event binding in Backbone.js, it helps you make use of a very powerful design pattern, which is the publisher subscriber pattern. And this is a proven computer science design pattern which aims to help you solve the problem of coupling. Basically, what this pattern helps you is that now the components of your application are loosely coupled from each other. So, for example, here I have a publisher and have 3 subscribers that listens to that publisher. Whenever whenever something happens, the publisher will trigger an event, and because these 3 subscribers are listening to this publisher, they're gonna receive the signal from the publisher and go out and do things, do the task, perform the task that they are assigned to independently. They don't, as you can see in the picture, they don't know anything about each other. The 3 subscribers are completely agnostic. Like, they don't know anything about, they don't even know that the other subscribers exist. And again, I'm gonna give you a more specific example in the sample application. So, testable. How many people here test your JavaScript? Okay, that's great.
How many people in here are on a team where those developers do
So,
JavaScript testing?
what do you use to test your JavaScript?
One team has is starting to use Jasmine, and
That's
the other
good.
team has something that we have in-house that someone worked on with JSpec.
How many people tested jQuery code? Yeah, raw jQuery, vanilla jQuery.
Not smart enough to use your mocking system.
No, but I mean, like, forget about the mocking and whatever for a second.
Yeah, jQuery, I mean, you typically, if you can read it, you assume it works.
So what does that mean? That means that it's very difficult. It means that it's very difficult to test, right? And JavaScript is extremely difficult to test. One of the things that is hard to test in JavaScript is AJAX callbacks. And with Backbone and helps from libraries like Jasmine and Sign-On for spying for your information, the testing component of the development cycle becomes easier. So here is an example of a test suite in our application. So we're testing a keyword model in this scenario, and we can easily spy on the built-in jQuery AJAX call. Just fake it with a call, like stop it, and then make sure that when the callback comes back from receive a response from the server, it's gonna trigger an event, and that's what happens on this line. So I want to make sure that after I have updated the event, the keyword, the model is going to trigger an event, and the event that is triggered is keyword updated event. So by using Backbone.js, it helps you test your JavaScript. You're more confident before you push your stuff out, and it's wonderful. And as with most things, in fact, everything, Backbone is no silver bullet. It has its downside. The first downside is that it doesn't have a clear design guidance. It doesn't have a restricted way of doing things. In fact, there will be always more than one way to do things. So when I first started developing my application, I developed a tool using a specific way, but then a week later, I was like, I could do this, I could accomplish this using a different way. So am I wrong or something? But then I realized there's no restriction. Some people still prefer for their views to call each other to update things. Some other people use the publisher subscriber pattern. I'm a big fan of it. Everything is okay. You just have to come up with a consistent mindset and make sure that it is communicated well within your team, so that if you bring on new developers, they can easily follow the pattern and adapt to it. And of course, you have more physical files to manage because now your application is very modular. Instead of having one giant view that does everything, now you break that giant view into subviews. And you will see in the example application. And it has a moderate learning curve, of course, because we're all familiar with the jQuery mindset. Like before jQuery, it was very difficult to do things. jQuery came out. It was an evolution. So we're so used to it. But then after a while, we realized that it's great for DOM manipulation, and now we have to shift away from it. So it's going to take some time to get used to. All right. So with the advantages and the downside, we have to come to some agreement, some practices that we apply in our team. Because like I mentioned, there's always more than one ways to do things. So we override built-in functionality of model, mostly model, when necessary. And when does this happen? Andrew has mentioned it, but when does that happen? That happens when you work with, for example, Rails. For example, when you create when you create an instance on the server, you pass in the attributes. Backbone is not going to know that it has to pass it as a hash with a root element. For example, book, and then the attributes of the book. You have to, before you persist it on the server, you have to massage it on the client side. And that is one example of having to override the built-in save functionality of the model. Another example, which occur in our application, the manual override framework, is for everything that we do, for every creation, for every update, deletion, we have to send a note. So for example, if we create a keyword, we have to send a note, which is not an attribute of the keyword model. So if we send it by calling model.save, we're gonna get an error on the server side that the note attribute is not an attribute of the keyword model. So before we send it to the server, we have to massage it. Make sure that we don't send note as an attribute of the keyword model. So event is your friend. Again, I'm a big fan of the publisher subscriber pattern, and you will see how powerful it is in the sample application. Use descriptive names for events. The documentation of Backbone.js mentioned that whenever you call model.save, a save event is triggered. But to me, that name doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, what is save? So instead of using save as an event name, use something like keyword save event or keyword updated event. And the last point, use a templating language. Backbone.js is extremely lenient on the choice of the template language that you use. You can use underscore, which is built into the underscore library that Andrew mentioned earlier. Or you can use jQuery template. I'm not advising you to use jQuery template because it has been stopped developed. You can use handlebars or mustache, anything that you see fit, anything that your team find easy to work with. And yeah, don't use string concatenation. It doesn't smell nice. And not only will it hurt your eyes when you read it, but also will hurt you when your string has special characters. Double quote, single quote, ampersand, you name it.
Multi-line.
Yeah, thank you.
What do we use?
Sorry?
What do we use?
So for the first application that I worked on here, we use a jQuery template. And after the project finished, I only found out after the project finished that the jQuery team stopped developing jQuery template. So for future applications, we're going to use underscore because it's built in. We don't have to load another templating language. But if you want to. All right, so we cherry-picked some resources for you. Don't worry, they're not links to more links. So just they were handpicked, and I find that the first link, the documentation, is very useful. The framework, the Backbone.js, also comes with annotated source code. So if you're interested in finding out what's going on, you can read the comment. They're pretty helpful. Yep. So sample application, GitHub issues. So we're gonna give you an example application to demonstrate all the points that we mentioned from the beginning, to make sure that we're not treating you with a bunch of crap. For everything that we say, we want to give you an example to back it up. And what will our application do? So our application will leverage the GitHub API to fetch all the issues of a repository, let you filter by label, let you see the comments, let you add comments, let you create a new issue, let you see the issues that have been closed, on and on and on. So here we go. Everybody see all right? So this is the home page. I'm gonna log in with my GitHub account. I'm gonna search for a repository. So let's see what's going on in Rails. So this will give you a list of issues of Rails that people are working on. Let's go into this one.
This is using Backbone router, isn't it?
No.
It's all on the page.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that it uses the router. In fact, the application is hosted on GitHub, and there's a branch called router. If you are interested in using router, just check out that branch and see. Sorry?
Yeah, thank you. Keep going.
So
Router adds a lot of complexity to your Backbone code.
That example was complicated.
Yeah.
So this is the details of that issue. Let's go into this one. I'm seeing that it has 4 comments, so I want to see the comments. Here we go.
So all these are like the comments are probably a collection of comments, and then there's a collection view associated with
the issues.
With the issue, and then there's a template representing what each comment should render, and then the template goes through each of the comments and renders it and puts it in order and stuff. So what you're seeing here is a lot of combination of collections with views and listening to events that are on clicks and stuff.
I'll go through the code and you'll see it's actually, yeah. So let's search, let's look at another repository. Let's see what happens in Node.js. This one is fun. There's always something going on in here. So,
Most active project on GitHub?
actually, the most active one is Twitter Bootstrap. It's the most watched repository on Earth at this point. Yeah. So I see that a bunch of people have created a bunch of labels for these issues. So right here, chai process has 3 issues associated with. So I'm gonna see. So I'm gonna see the issues associated with chai process. TLS. Don't know what that means. Feature request, etc. And if I want to create a new issue, I can just click this. I can put in some text, like, hey there. Make sure it's big and bold. Preview, and this is using Markdown. But I don't want to be a loudmouth, so I'm going to backtrack. And let's see. Let's look at the issues that have been closed. Here they are, indicated by a red dot. Let's go back to all the issues. All right, so that's the 3,000 feet overview of what our application does. Now let's dive into what it means in code. So, the first question when we look at this is, how are we going to implement it? How are we going to go from doing things the old way to doing things using Backbone.js? And it's our first flight together. We need to take off the plane. We knew it, so we have created a little inspection tool right here that will outline some of the views that are used in this application. So let's see what happens. So here you see the views that are present on this page and what they do. So at the very top level, we have a dashboard view that manage all the top level functionalities. For example, clicking on the About dialog. The reason is because popping up this dialog is a functionality that doesn't seem to belong to any of the subviews. That's why we have a top level view to manage it. And here we have the label view, the label views. Each of these is a view. Issue views, issue filter view, issues browser view. And over here we have repo finder view. All of these views listen to a conductor, which is the issues collection. So whenever I click on this at a very high level, whenever I click on this, the conductor say, hey, I want to fetch all the issues for Node.js. Let's go and fetch it. And it pings the server, get back a bunch of issues, and then trigger an event. And because the issues browser event the issues browser view listen to that event, it's going to know that the response has come back from the server, and now it needs to come into stage. So code-wise,
Who's the conductor?
the collection, the issues collection. A question to ask. So when you start an app, you'll be like, what should be the conductor, right? So The conductor is the thing that communicates with the server, does all the fetching, all the database operation, and all of you should listen to that conductor to make sure that everything is orchestrated.
I think a lot of times when we used to write our JavaScript, you take a lot of like, okay, I have my DOM, now what can I respond to my, like, what I have on the page? But now you can definitely take a more data-centric approach and saying, here's my data, now how can I show it? You know, here's what my data does. You know, and that'll drive your interactions or what you can do on a page instead of more of, here's what I can present, now what can I do to interact with it, like that kind of thing. It's definitely a reverse approach to that.
So we have two basic views. Well, not two basic views, but the two views that we're interested in, which is the repo finder view, this view, and the issues browser view, this whole giant wide area. So what does the repo finder view do? So it has an initialize function, which we call when you initialize the view. And it does a bunch of things, like set up selectors, set up jQuery selectors to cache them, to reuse on and on without having to requery the DOM tree every time. It's set up, it declares the events that are going to happen within that view. For example, here, when I do a key press on repo query, which is the text box, this function is going to be called handle key press event. And if I press the enter key, which is 13, the view is gonna search for repository, search for all the issues. And it does that by delegating the search operation to the collection, which is this line right here, fetch. And it passed in the model. You will see why in a second, but you will see why it passed this model in a second. And then when the issues, let's look at the issues collection. See what it does. The issues collection is the conductor that I mentioned earlier that this view listens to. So it fetch by pinging the server, passing a bunch of parameters, and then when the HX call comes back, it's going to add issues in JSON format into itself, and then trigger the issues fetched event. And because the repo finder view listens to that event, so when that event is triggered, this function is called this.hide, which will hide a view. So that's why after you click search, the two views switch. One view disappears, the other one comes in.
They do it in a specific order?
What do you sort?
Is there an order in which one hides and the other one stays?
No. Because everything listens to the same event. So when that event is triggered, things happen simultaneously.
In Backbone, there is an events hash that does, as you bind them, that's how the order they'll get triggered in. So it depends on which view actually gets instantiated first, that one will get triggered first, because there actually is an order, but I mean, it almost seems simultaneous in most browsers because events are pretty fast and very cheap as far as a browser execution. 2 to 5 minutes.
All right, so let's look at the issues browser view. The issues browser view also listens to the issues collection. In particular, the issues fetched event. So when that event comes back, the render function of the view is going to be called. And it is going to show the view. So that's why after you hit the search button, one view disappears, the other one comes in. and that's it. We could also do all the listing issues within this view, but again, because we want our application to be modular, we don't want this one view to be responsible for everything, because if a view does everything, it would do nothing. So instead, we will delegate the displaying of all the issues to a subview of this issues browser view, which is the issues list view over here. So again, a bunch of initialization that happens when you initialize it, and the render function. So this particular view is responsible for displaying all the issues that you see on the screen. And it does that by using the underscore each function, loop through all the issues, and for each of the issues, create a view, inject the issue as a model into the view, and render. The reason why we inject the model in is because later on, if we click on one particular issue, we want to pass that model of the issue data to the collection so that it will trigger another event to display the specific details of that event on the screen. So does anybody see how the publisher subscriber pattern is used in here? So we have the repo finder view over here. We have the issues browser over here. Instead of having them talk to each other, for example, like saying, hey, display, I'm gonna go away. You need to come in. We don't do that. We have another object in between. We have the conductor. We have the publisher, which is the issues collection. So when we click search, this view will tell the conductor, hey, I want you to search for the issues. The conductor go out, search for fetch the issues, and then trigger the event telling the view, hey, now I got some issue. You need to go away and you need to come in. So that's how the publisher subscriber event design pattern is used here. And the benefit of that is that now your two views don't know about each other. They are totally decoupled from each other. If you want to make change to one view, you just have to do it in that particular view and not having to worry about messing up the other one, or it's the other way around. There is, however, one downside with the publisher subscriber pattern, which is there's no guarantee that if something over here breaks, this thing over here is gonna realize that. So you just have to make sure that you QA your app properly, and those scenarios don't happen, and that's why we have QA. But again, it's because of the decoupled nature of it. If such thing happens and you need to fix something, you just have to fix it in this view. You don't have to worry about what happens here. So that's the beauty of it. So yeah, I guess that's pretty much it for the sample application demonstration. The repository, this is on GitHub. If you want to check out, comment, criticize, you're welcome to. I accept pull requests. Yeah, just feel free to comment. I'm not emotionally attached to my code in any way. I try to. Yeah, question.
So I'm guessing you guys are using Backbone.js internally for projects here?
Yes. Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
I think Andrew will be a better fit because he works on Buzz, or maybe Chris.
So yeah, so Backbone uses, or Buzz uses Backbone a bit, mostly in our like form preview, where as you're changing fields in a form, it's actually live updating what that might look like after you would submit. So it's kind of like a live preview there. And then also, since we deal with a lot of social networks, there's a lot of like, you're looking at statuses on Facebook or Twitter and stuff, and then to rearrange that and to list that really neatly. We just use a lot of templating with Backbone where the interaction is just handled all through Backbone. And everything is just represented in a data model as far as like, here's a status or here's a post or something like that. So, and then actually, I think Buzz is maybe like 30% in Backbone, maybe a little more, 50% Backbone. But then Tree, he wrote a whole manual override tool pretty much in Backbone. So,
And actually, there's one point that I want to mention. So unless your application has crazy intensive front-end requirements, for example, for what you saw on the screen, using Backbone for small projects would be pretty pointless. So just make your own judgment. If your app just has like a contact form with some email validation, using Backbone.js would overkill. So use your own judgment.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then, I know this code kind of looks a little complicated. Like I said, there is a learning curve, but we tried doing that in jQuery straight up, and
You will see.
So, in the end, there is like I said, there is a bit of a learning curve, and it looks like you gotta learn the framework, but it's better than a huge jQuery.
But if you work with it once, twice, you will love it. I love it.
Any more questions?
Check IRC.
Oh, is there any questions from IRC? Also, just a quick note, like Backbone's not the only JavaScript framework out there.
There's also Spine, which is heavily influenced by Backbone.js.
Hence the name.
Sorry?
Hence the name.
Yeah, hence the name. And but it has some different philosophy. For example, in Spine, there's no collection because you can do everything using a model, just like how Rails works. All the data operation is through a model. And in fact, even in Backbone.js, you could totally throw away the collection component.
There's
You
others
just use
like
the model.
there's others like Ember.js by the Sprout Core guy, and a couple other ones. Not really know off the top of my head.
Knockout,
Oh yeah, there's Knockout.js.
Knockback.
These guys are real creative with their naming.
Actually, Knockback. There's another great framework called Knockout, which has the built-in event data binding. So with Backbone.js, even it helps you with the publisher-subscriber pattern, but the handler for the listener, like what happens when an event is triggered, you still have to do all that code manually. But Knockback the goal of Knockback is to erase that process. Like it has a functionality of carrying out all the operations when an event is triggered automatically. And then Knockback comes in, which aims to bring in all the good things of Backbone.js and Knockout.js.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of tools out there available for this field of user interaction / like client-side frameworks and stuff. So Backbone's definitely not the one. Any more questions? No?
Complaints?
All right, that's it. That's it.